Just when you think it couldn't get worse for Canadians, Americans, you better take heed, because it's coming your way next. There's something called anarcho-tyranny. You know what that is? That's when a government seeks to centralize and consolidate power, and first they give you the anarchy and the criminality, and then they come up with a solution, a bright idea, tyranny. More militarization of the police and a disarmed populace to allow the criminality to thrive. And what do you get? You get a fiefdom of excessive rule of law amidst a sea of lawlessness. And all the law-abiding citizens have their rights attrited and their freedoms eroded. Now, what's happened here is that the 2.2 million firearms owners in Canada have had all their data stolen. Okay? And this is from a third-party, undisclosed third-party vendor that the RCMP still uses. So in Canada, you need to get a gun license, for my American friends. You need to get a gun license, and there's 2.2 million registered firearms owners. Now, you don't have to register individual firearms since they got rid of the gun registry, but you do have to register what are called restricted firearms, which used to be things like AR-15s and handguns. All 2.2 million registered firearms owners of the Canadian Firearms Owners Program have now been disclosed in a huge data breach, the biggest of its sort. 2.2 million people who own firearms have now been doxxed, and that information is likely circulating on the black market somewhere. Imagine the possibilities for criminality. Now, if you're of a Machiavellian mindset and you're into this anarcho-tyranny business and you are trying to justify a crackdown of law-abiding citizens and their gun ownership rights, well then, could it be coincidental or accidental that you just so happen to leak all of their information to a bunch of criminals? Shucks, now we really have to come and get the guns. Why? Because the criminals know where you live now. And they're going to come steal them. Names, mailing addresses at minimum, possibly more information, because there's a lot of information that goes into registering for a possession and acquisition license. The license number itself, obviously, but if you have those restricted firearms, and if you are a restricted firearms holder, that will be stated on your license, and then those criminals would presume that you have the better guns, right? The ones that criminals like to use. Now, which is not to say that those guns don't have a place in sport shooting and all the rest. I'm just saying there's a reason why there's those tiers of restricted, non-restricted, and prohibited. So just by virtue of knowing, even if they don't know specifically what guns that person has, they can surmise that maybe there's handguns there. Maybe there are, ones that you're still allowed to, keep until you die or grandfather, whatever the case is. I can't remember the specifics of the new regulations that just went into place since 2021. But essentially now they know who has the ARs. The criminals do. Which is not to say that you couldn't find, semi-autos of equivalent capability in the non-restricted gun cabinets of these 2.2 million Canadians. But nonetheless, this is a big deal. And post-2021, I believe the government started keeping track, not a dedicated registry, but I think they know what type of gun you purchased post-2021, even if it was non-restricted. So this is huge, because now this information has potentially been leaked to the dark web and is going to be used by criminals to do break-in entries. And look, if you know that somebody has guns, it's not hard to case a place. If you know who lives there, you case a place for a day or so, you get to understand the person's patterns, and then you go, you break in, and you take their guns. And now the RCMP is going to say, well, we have to now crack down or increase security restrictions or various regulations that are going to inhibit your ability to either use those firearms or transport them or store them. There's going to be more and more requirements, and just continuously ratchet it down, right? More and more tyranny. to try to fix the problems that they're creating. These incompetent buffoons, and they're still using the undisclosed third-party vendor who succumbed to this data breach. Can you believe that shit? So now we're talking about burglary, theft, criminals targeting gun owners' homes, doxing, harassment. They could leak this stuff to anti-gun advocates who are going to be threatening, stalking, trying to make your life a living hell. People who work in government that is heavily bloated at this point, and now they want to add another 300,000 civil task force. Well, what if they don't like gun owners? Who's to say they don't misuse this information in some other way in an attempt to try to compromise people in other ways, in their careers or what have you. Identity fraud, obviously, there's a big risk here because you have to forfeit all of your information. So never mind the gun stuff, just your social insurance number and everything that goes along with identifying yourself to a government agency or whatever information you had to provide to the police. And they get fairly specific, have you been divorced recently? Things like that, in an attempt to screen you to see whether or not you should qualify for a firearms license. Obviously, there is a potential government misuse here, even though the RCMP already have access to this data. It could potentially be misused as well. This undisclosed third-party vendor, whoever they are leveraging, I really have to wonder, who is that? Is that Palantir? Are they really using that to try to triangulate where people are going to be on this whole gun confiscation issue? I wouldn't doubt that they have a database of potential troublemakers, if you know what I mean. And so maybe the government is not allowed to do certain things with this information, but other agencies are. And if you were really being draconian about this and you wanted to circumvent the law, then maybe you could have these third-party agencies do things with this data that government is not allowed to do. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. So that is huge, okay? And then on top of it, of course, we have this whole assault style, as it's called, firearms compensation program, also known as the ASFCP, launched in January 2026 for prohibited assault-style firearms banned since 2020. Now, this whole thing is mired in controversy, as many of you know. The government has admitted it's bullshit. There has been just every day more and more police stations, provincial police services, politicians, whole provinces saying that they're not going to comply with this. Not saying they're not going to comply because they can't, because that's illegal, but saying that they're not going to assist the RCMP in any way. And in fact, in provinces in Alberta and Saskatchewan, they're actually going to make it more difficult because they're going to require the issuance of licenses to these confiscation agents. Now, I can't for the life of me think about how any self-respecting RCMP, who isn't just a grunt, the lowest of the low, can understand how you are going to be kicking down the doors of your own friends and family, your own damn door. I understand you got to get a paycheck, right? I understand that those ostriches needed to be murdered because you had to pay the bills. Situation like that, as terrible as that was, okay, maybe there wasn't an overwhelming amount of people who were in support of you. Here you have millions of gun owners. And not only those millions of gun owners, but the people that surround them who are indifferent or pro-gun but don't have a gun license. You have millions of Canadians. You have the police forces. You have the provincial police forces. You have politicians like Rob Ford even coming out and saying this is the dumbest thing ever. You even have the author of this gun grab himself, Gary Anadasandri, I can't pronounce his last name, caught saying that the program will be ineffective and that if he had to do it all over again, he would have walked it back. Now, they're making all these lies up now, and they are embellishing the program to say that, well, in the first week, we acquired 20,000 firearms. Apparently, these are like, grandma's firearms that she had for years and years that she never used because, grandpa's been dead for a long time type thing. It really is, they're not seeing the compliance numbers that they're touting. At least that's what we would hope, because even if they are, there's not going to be enough money to compensate people effectively for these. Now, you really have to ask yourself, what sort of malevolent force would push governments into seizing the property of law-abiding citizens who do nothing but pay taxes and abide by the law and mind their own business, to disarm them while empowering the criminal element within society? Play that tape through to its logical conclusion. And I'm really tired of being too circumspect about this, because there's too many people who are, even in gun rights advocacy agencies, speaking way too dispassionately about this particular problem. We got to get fired up a little bit. I mean, if the truckers could do that thing in Ottawa for a pandemic that was pretty much over anyways, and we can't rally as millions of Canadians, you have Alberta getting ready to sign a petition to separate, being constantly lambasted by these smug, arrogant officials and media talking heads out there in the East, not the Eastern Ontarian people per se, because I really don't think this Alberta separatist movement is about we don't want to be a part of Canada. It's we don't want the feds in our business. And this is just another classic example of that. And yeah, there's some issues to do with equalization payments, but it's mostly a jurisdictional thing where the provinces are tired of the federal government getting in the way. And when they do get in the way, I mean, imagine if you are living in this province and your province is putting up billions upon billions of dollars, you're sending it out east, and how are you rewarded? Well, they slap more regulations on you and they try to take away your guns and they try to erode your freedoms with all these bullshit bills that they're passing now. I mean, eventually people aren't going to put up with that shit, and that's what you're seeing. So while I don't have high hopes for the separation movement, I do think what it's absolutely going to do is force the federal government to back the fuck off. That's what it's going to do. Alberta's likely not going to separate. It's very complicated. It may happen, right? It may gain the same level of momentum as the Quebec separatist movement has, and there may be their own party that emerges, that breaks off from the Conservatives, which would be bad because that means that, we would be divided again and we ain't getting any guns back in that case. And that's one thing I will say for the CCFR that I agree with, is that, Pierre Poilievre is the cleanest shirt in a dirty laundry basket. And even if you don't think it's ideal, if you're one of these hardline conservatives, even if you don't think his platform is ideal, it at least buys us a little bit more time. Because once they come and get these guns, it's over. And now they're talking about how can they come and get the guns. The amnesty ends on October 30th, 2026. And you have until March 31st to declare these if you want compensation for your firearms. Now, there's a lot of trickery going on that I'm not going to get into again. Rod Giltaca explains it fairly succinctly. Essentially, it's something like they're trying to trick people into telling the government what they have by saying, hey, we only have a certain amount of money, and whoever comes first is going to get it for the guns. Once the budget for the gun buyback runs out, you're SOL. So now you have people scrambling. March 31st is coming. I better get some of this money, but there's no guarantees you're going to get it. If you only knew what I knew, you would be terrified about why they're doing this. You really have to ask yourself, why are they trying to disarm the best, most productive people in society? And why are they trying to allow the criminals to run riot and put those guns in the hands of people with no scruples who would allow themselves to be used in such a way? And I'm talking to the police that will be used to confiscate these firearms. Because if you can't see how this is going to be misused against you and your family, then I just hope, and I know there are a lot of intelligent RCMP officers out there who don't agree with this. I know there was a lot of intelligent RCMP officers who didn't agree with the ostrich stupidity. But there's a lot of dum-dums out there who are probably going to just follow orders. We know that. It's well historically precedented. So I think it's up to the ones who can see the forest for the trees here to try to get through to those people and let them know that they're building out their own prison. The government doesn't have anybody's interest in mind. You really need to ask, especially in the current geopolitical climate that we're in. You would think that we would be taking a Switzerland-style civil defense posture and trying to, create more firearms responsible owners, get more people proficient in these things. This is, of course, why they want the 300,000 civil defense task force, because it's political, right? And they want to choose people of a certain, not necessarily a political proclivity, because at the end of the day, there's just as many dumb conservatives as there is liberals. And some people aren't going to agree with that, but that's 100% the truth. There's just as many sheep on both sides. I'm not a political person. The only reason, and I say this, the only reason why I would vote conservative at this point in time is for the guns. There might be a few things, culture war related and finance related, but, both sides have their own equal degree of idiocy. So while there is no confirmed, and I say confirmed, reports of the military being leveraged, or the civil defense task forces they want to create being leveraged to confiscate these firearms, I would be very careful that they didn't enlist people just for this specific purpose. That they find those people who are ideologically charged and they put guns in their hand and they say, okay, you go get the guns. So, what do? Call our MPs? Have a protest? I don't know what we do. I've done my part, man. I mean, I've stated what I can state. I've tried to wake people up. But at the end of the day, maybe Canadians just don't want guns. Maybe we just don't want it bad enough. I hope to hell that the police and the feds who are going to be enforcing this understand how it's going to impact them and their families negatively. And that they choose to not comply or resist in some way. And they choose to do so in a manner which is in accordance with whatever they are legally endowed to do. Of course, I have to put that in there as a caveat because we don't want to misconstrue things. And I'm not so sure this is a hill I'm ready to die on at this point, because why go to bat for people who don't want it for themselves? And I know there's a lot of people sleeping out there who just simply can't see what we're sleepwalking into right now. I mean, it's really crazy. Our economy has been flatlined. The price of food continues to go up. The government is doing fuck all to address any of these problems. And the guy who destroyed it all, they get him out of there at just the right moment and replace him with somebody else. And these sheep elect the same party once again, who is bringing in more and more draconian laws to do what? Restrict more freedoms of law-abiding people and let the fucking criminals run riot. Well, what's the end result of that? It's a dystopian police state. That's what it is. And that's what we need to start calling it, because that's what's coming. And the world is only going to become more and more dangerous. And a government like this, in that context, will become more and more centralized. And unlike the United States, where they practice something a little bit differently, they have the Second Amendment, they still have their own brand of tyranny with ICE, which is an abuse of power in many respects, albeit a justified causal factor. Just like here, you could say that it's justified for the police to be more militarized because they have policies which allow the gangs to become more militarized. But there was a time when Canadians owned all kinds of firearms, AK-47s, full automatics, 50 caliber rifles. And you know what? The police carried a handgun. They didn't wear bulletproof vests. So what happened from then until now? Think about it.